Hello there, welcome to the Animation Industry Podcast. My name is Terry, and last week I had a dream about baking where there's originals candies into chocolate chip cookies, and so I actually just tried to do this and they turned out amazing. So I'm going to start a cookbook with this one recipe in it. Today I'm chatting with the legendary animator and director Chris Bailey. Chris has worked on most of the Disney hand-drawn films, including Oliver and Company, The Little Mermaid, The Rescuers Down Under, The Lion King, and Hercules. And most recently, he's gone on to work with 6 Point Harness to direct The Great Wolf Pack: A Call to Adventure, Great Wolf Lodge's first feature film, which brings about a very interesting discussion about branded feature films, which is a new kind of concept to me, and I think in general in the industry. Now, besides this, Chris gives away his super tips for mastering hand-drawn animation and how to strategize yourself into a director role. So without further ado, let's jump in. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good. Thanks for coming on the chat. So, you've had a very illustrious career in animation. You've been animating since before I was even a thought. What is it like eating, sleeping, breathing animation most of your life? Like, how do you feel right now?
Well, I haven't been eating and breathing it my entire life. When I was a kid, I actually wanted to draw superhero comics, and as you can see
I mean, that's
behind
kind of
me,
similar.
got the comic book racks. I have some original comic book art on the walls. So even though I'm a Disney guy, I'm an animation guy in my career, which is more decades long than I care to admit. I'm like a comic book, Marvel comic guy at heart, actually.
Don't tell me you were animating all these years wishing you were working on comic books.
No, I've done a couple comic books of my own. I like reading comics. I like doing
Okay,
animation, and I read
okay.
comics. But I do love comics. I'd still love to do comics or maybe some superhero animation or something.
So
That's,
you're still, I mean, you're still quite active in animating and directing. Do you ever lose that excitement?
um, I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes because you get tired doing anything.
Yeah.
But um, I always considered it kind of my superpower that I can get excited about most anything, especially if it has a character and sort of a unique perspective. I don't know. I'm
So
like, yeah, I can get behind that. It's kind of like I've done a lot of visual effects supervision as well and animated
yeah.
supervised animation for live action movies like Alvin and the Chipmunks and X-Men 2 and in between directing and my own things or not my own things but directing. I I enjoy getting behind someone else's perspective and helping realize that, as much as doing my own thing, because I learn from those experiences.
Of course, that makes sense. Where do you find, I guess, like, I'm just thinking, over the years, where does that well of enthusiasm to stay in the industry and feel excited and, continually push yourself to try different things? Because you've kind of done it all at this point. You haven't just stayed as a hand-drawn animator all these years. Where does that well you tap in? What is in that well that you tap in?
Um, Gosh, I don't know. Let me think about that. It could be a character flaw. Maybe I'm just impatient and I have a short attention span.
So
Things that I
animation is just that thing that keeps you entertained.
Maybe. Well, when most of us have jobs growing up in school. There's you paper out, you work at a grocery store, or you flip
Yeah.
hamburgers or something. And I always at the ripe old age of like 16 or 17, I realized there was a curve to every job I'd have. There would be a panic of not knowing how to do it. Then there'd be a brief moment in time where I could do the job and I was comfortable and kind of enjoyed it. And then boredom just set in. It
Oh
was like,
yeah,
oh
yeah.
my God, what time is it? It's time to go home yet? Oh, it's only been like 5 minutes past the last time I looked at the clock. So there's something about animation and creating a performance and, back in the old days of flipping paper, to people on the outside, you're doing the same drawing 100 times. But to someone on the outside of someone writing, they're typing the same letters over and over again. But
Exactly,
for both a
exactly.
writer and an animator, you're solving problems in your head and you're creating something, and it's incredibly engaging. And it's still at the end of the day, you look at it and go, could I have done more, or did I communicate what was in my head? It seemed like if there's a bar in your head that you can never reach, that that generates your excitement. At least it does for me.
Oh, totally. No, I get that, the learn something, excitement, learn it for, and then you're satisfied for like 10 seconds and then boredom. I even feel that in animation too, but if I was doing the same thing over and over again, but just like character performance is so challenging and you're constantly discovering how they look and are posed and animate on a page, which is just super interesting to me. So I also do stop motion, so that's a whole different challenge and interesting thing for me too. So okay,
Yeah, I love stop motion. I'd love to talk to you more about that. One of my, I've been teaching part-time at Chapman University, and I teach a live action storyboard class and animation class. And there was an animator, or there was a stop motion animator in my live action class, and you know, people like want to show me stuff, and I'm like, you know, gosh, is this gonna be good or is it not gonna be good? I always kind of I'm afraid half the time because it's like, okay, if it really needs a lot of work, I want to be encouraging and
yeah,
give
yeah.
concrete advice. Man, this guy blew me away, and it was like, huh? It's like this is a guy in a student. He was doing it for fun. Wasn't even like a hardcore stop motion guy, and it was completely professional level work.
Amazing. Well, let me
So,
tell you, everybody who does stop motion does it for fun. You
oh,
wouldn't be
okay,
doing
all
it if
right,
it
very
was
good.
if it wasn't
Fair
for
point.
fun.
Fair point.
So, dial back a little bit for me. So you're 16, 17, wanting to get into comics. How did you end up, in animation, and not only in animation, but, at the top studio in the world at the time, working on some of the biggest films and et cetera, et cetera. Like how did this happen for you?
Well, the in those days there was a it was the but before the Disney Renaissance of the 80s,
Yeah.
animation was really dead. So when I was a little kid in the 60s, and I'd watch, the reruns of Bugs Bunny on TV, and I loved those. And then they were doing a lot of superhero shows, but it was before the 70s that were all politically correct and where nobody could hit each other. So the superheroes in the shows I watched, the bad guys were really bad and the good guy could really hit him in the face, and it was really fun for me. It was a mirror version of the comic books I was reading and looking at. And Johnny Quest, for example, that was a real action show. Johnny would, be on the bow of the boat with a gun shooting at alligators as they were going down the Amazon, and so I
For
loved all that
alligators.
that action adventure. So I grew up, loving cartoons, wanted to be a comic book artist and do action adventure. And animation, but TV animation during the 70s as I was growing up was terrible. But I still wanted to do it, and I was reading a magazine. I think I was a junior in high school, and I was reading a magazine called the Comics Journal, and it had an animation column, and it mentioned Cal Arts and a place where you could learn to do Disney style character animation. And I never thought I'd be good enough to work at Disney, and I just figured whatever I'd learned there would help me move characters around a little better and would just make me better in whatever, comic books I ended up drawing or whatever career in art I ended up taking. And it just so happened that, as I got into it, it was just on the cusp of this whole second golden age.
Right.
So that
So
was it. I went to Cal Arts, and I had wonderful people in my class, from Kelly Asbury to Rob Minkoff, and good friends of mine, and became very successful in their own right, and Kirk Wise and Kevin Lima, and um, you know it, I just kind of rode the animation wave, kind of that simple.
that sounds great. So you just went to Cal Arts being like, I hope this improves my drawing skills. And then you got snatched
Yeah,
up
I
by
look. It
Disney.
was because I went there, and all my friends, they knew Disney films, they knew all the animators and all the directors, and I'd seen a couple Disney films growing up, but I didn't have that background. I
Hmm.
could tell you, who drew the first 150 issues of the Fantastic Four, but but not that. And that was very exciting for me because it was all very very sort of fun and new, and I don't know. I think I'm kind of getting off track, um, but that
Well,
was it. I was going to do comic books until I read that article in a comic book magazine of interviews and criticism that mentioned Cal Arts. And I think the biggest thing is that there wasn't the art school to go to at the time where I could get a degree in comic book art, but Cal
Yeah.
Arts would give you a Bachelor of Arts in character animation. So it was like, okay, I'm not a fine artist, but I can go to this art school, and my parents will approve, and I can do cartoons or whatever happens to.
Nice. So you just happened, you're kind of saying it was just like the right timing, I guess, for when
It was,
animation came.
yep,
Does that mean
I think
everybody in your
so.
graduating class just got snatched up by different studios?
Yeah, there were quite a few people in the classes just before me and after mine that just had really wonderful careers. Oh, hang on one second.
Sure.
Let me turn that off. I have a sync sketch going for
Oh.
the Great Wolf pack, and someone is scrubbing through it right now. So I'm hearing Great Wolf come out of another speaker.
You're literally
But I'm
eating,
sorry, say that
sleeping,
again
eating
one more time.
animation.
What's that?
I said you're literally eating, sleep, you're turning off Sync Sketch while doing a podcast about animation. You're literally doing it all.
That's right.
Okay, so
Then I'm animating a shot with my foot over here.
yeah, right. So you're at Disney and you start as a junior animator.
Yeah, I think. Let's see. I was hired by Daryl Van Sitters, who runs Renegade Animation at the moment. It's a little boutique. I shouldn't even say little. But it is a boutique animation studio in Glendale. And he was my first director at Disney, and he had a shorts unit that was doing Sport Goofy and some other things like that. And so I started out as a freelance animator for him, and then he hired me to come in house. Then Disney decided to fold the unit, and they asked all of us in house if we'd come help out, help finish The Great Mouse Detective, because that was in its final 6 months of production, and all these movies are behind in the last few months, and it's like anybody that can hold a pencil that can help out, they
Yeah.
say, hey, come on over. So I animated a few shots on that, but I actually left after that to go back and do CGI for a year, and then that CGI studio folded, and then I was asked by some people at Disney, well, would you like to come back and animate for us at Disney? Some 2D animation. I was like, yeah, sure. I got nothing else to do. And then I ended up staying for another 10 years or so.
Wow. That sounds pretty turbulent. Why do you think they asked you to come back? Did you, when you were working there, you excelled at, a certain like character animation or something like that, because they're Disney, they can ask anybody, I guess.
Well, I don't know about that. Because I was a junior animator, and I can't say I was setting the world on fire with any of my shots, but I had a little digital CG experience before I came to Disney the first time. And when I left, it was to work at a company called Digital Productions. And so I was getting a lot of 3D experience at that point. And Disney was talking with them about software development and things
Hmm.
like that. And so I was talking with a lot of executives at Disney while I was at Digital, and about being part of what they were possibly going to do with um, Disney and Digital as a team in the future. So I think when that didn't happen and Digital folded, they said, "Hey, look, we're not going to go forward with Digital, but would you like to come back and work for us at Disney?" So I think it was that relationship that I'd started on Great Mouse Detective that I continued, even though I was away at Digital, that
Nice.
that led to them asking me to come back.
So tell me about, you were at Disney for 10 years and you were animating on a whole bunch of films that were pivotal to Disney, becoming such a big success. What is maybe, can you share some skill knowledge on becoming a super amazing, hand-drawn animator when it comes to all the experience you've had?
Well, there were two. I worked with. I was lucky when I was a young animator to work with two just wonderful supervising animators with two completely different approaches.
Hmm.
Um, one was Glenn Keane, who we've all heard about, and what was amazing about him, aside from the fact that he can draw anything, and but he really had this sort of like inside out way of animating, and how to feel the character, and but there was a lot of technical advice in there as well. Like he always wanted to start a shot with a character if they're walking on the down part of the walk, or in an antic, so the character explodes at the beginning of the shot. There's some kind of mild explosion. He didn't mean to literally explode, but just you're moving up into the shot or out into the shot. And so I thought that was wonderful. And also I realized that even behind the most complicated drawing or seemingly complicated drawing, there was this really simple S-curve line of action to his work. And he would draw shapes first and then just like cram the character and anatomy into it. But if you really look at it, these shapes that are moving they're very simple, basic animation principles, with just all this wonderful stuff hanging off of it. So he was one supervising animator, and man, he was tough to work for. He was wonderful as a human being, but this, I was struggling as an artist, but it was just learning like mountains every day. And then the other supervising animator I had that I really learned a lot from was Hendel Butoy. He went on to direct as well. He was equally great animator, equally a great actor. His approach was a little bit quieter and it was a little more technical. So where, Glenn might say something like, he needs to look more sad. And I'm like, I think he looks sad. It's like, more sad how? Hendel would be like, oh, do this to the eye or do this to the mouth, or here, when you do this four-legged walk, pretend like the back leg is kicking out the front leg. That'll get the pattern working right. Or always lead with their head. Animals lead with their head. People lead with their head. They blink and turn before their shoulders turn and follow. So I loved all that technical nuts and bolts advice, to add on top of everything I learned working with Glenn.
What have you, now that you've directed, have you taken, some perspective of being on both sides and getting all that advice and seeing where they are and applying that to yourself when you're directing?
Oh, completely. Of course you do. There are things
So
that
what kind of director would say
back in
you
Cal
are?
Arts that I still bring up to people today that's stuck in my head. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, tell me
The
about,
biggest thing I think is really, leading turns with their head. Something that drives me nuts, and I've done a fair amount of TV animation as well as, just high-end visual effects animation and feature animation. Something that drives me nuts that you see in TV is characters when they turn, they just flip the body like that, or and there's no overlapping action at all. And I'm like, dudes, necks are flexible. You can just do a little squash blink and turn the neck. If you want them to face the other way, do the little squash blink, turn the head, and then turn the shoulders after. But don't turn the solid character like it's on a turntable. But I do see a lot of that. I think it comes from board artists kind of taking a shortcut, and that where they can just grab a drawing and then they just clone it and flip it, instead of doing a head turn or something.
so let me ask you this from a storytelling perspective. There's one school of thought that says, as long as it accomplishes the job and it gets across to the audience, then it's fine, which would be, the whole flipping an image and saying they're looking this way and the general audience doesn't care. And then what would your school of thought be saying to that? Like, why go the extra mile to put in all these extra nuances and behavioral techniques and animation? Like, what does that bring on top of the storytelling of, gets the job done to a regular audience member?
Well, I do think it's not lost on people. And I think when you look at a project, you're even just as a young viewer or an uneducated viewer, I think you have an expectation by just by what it looks like. When you watch South Park, there's an element of humor that comes from these little cutout characters going, an explosion happens, and it's a comped live action explosion. It's funny, right? And you watch, say Rick and Morty, you're like, wow, that's like really great, really amazing looking monsters and funny humor, and then the characters do act, but there's not a Disney level to the posing and acting. It's kind of like SpongeBob. They flex a little bit. There's action and counteraction, but a lot of those things they're kind of baked into the look and the humor, in a sense, like South Park. But then if you look at Gendy's Primal, you're like, wow, that's like feature animation only limited, but when it moves as good as feature, and even the held poses act like feature, you know. And then of course when you actually become, I think the next level is when you have like Disney or Pixar, DreamWorks, where you really can get a more like natural performance, even if it's very caricatured and over the top. It moves very naturally, and the characters move naturally. So I think all those things are valid. But I think if you were to do a Disney film and you were to put South Park animation in the middle of a Disney or DreamWorks film, you'd think, what the hell? It would be
Yeah.
jarring and it would take you out of the world. And I think likewise, if you took a Disney shot and you put it in South Park, you'd be like, wait, what? I shouldn't say that. South Park could probably do anything and it would come off as
I think
funny.
Family Guy did an episode or an intro or
But
something where they did like Disney level animation
yeah,
just as a gag.
but I do think, acting is important. I think the better a character acts, people will, empathize with the character. I do think even directing like TV style animation, the number one thing is character and story. Is it clear? Just like what you said. It's got to be clear. If people don't get it, we're sunk. And then the second thing is, well, is it entertaining? Great, you can make someone walk through a door, but there's that old adage that a comedian doesn't walk through a funny door, they walk through a door funny. It's all performance based. So if so that's the next level. And then was it well drawn? Is it well animated? You know, then that's kind of especially for on a faster scheduled show like in TV. That's
Right.
like the icing on the cake.
Sounds like also what you're saying is it's also about kind of audience expectation of the storytelling they are coming to experience, I guess. Like what you said with South Park versus
Absolutely,
Disney.
because I loved Johnny Quest as a kid, and but they can fly in a jetpack and could be this really great pose on a held cell, and there's like a 12 frame cycle of the
Right.
jet behind it. And you're like, wow, cool.
It's
There's
probably less than 12 frames.
yeah, there's multiplane stuff going on, and you can project yourself there. But again, like you put that in a Disney film, and you're like, wait, what happened? The character went dead, and it became a pasted on,
Yeah.
drawing on top of the
Yeah.
background. But when you start out with a level of expectation, oh, this is comic booking, it's a little more graphic. I think the audience will go there with you.
So tell me how you made the jump from, you worked for years and years as an animator and now you're directing and you're being called on projects to direct. How did you make the jump for people were, calling you up to animate a scene versus people calling you up to direct a whole movie?
Well, I have to give the credit to Peter Schneider, who used to run feature animation when I was there. Um, I told him that was my long-term goal. I wanted to
Hmm.
direct. And he was like, "Oh, really? How are you going to do that?"
Yeah,
and
I'm asking you too.
yeah, and I said, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. That's kind of a funny story. So I'd come back to Disney, and I was on, Great Mouse Detective, or I think Great Mouse Detective, or the next one, Oliver and Company. Can't remember exactly which, but Disney was spread out among a bunch of annexes in Glendale, California. And I was walking back from one of the annexes to the main building, and I saw Peter Schneider driving out of the parking lot, and it was starting to rain. So I ran over his car and I banged on the window, and he rolled it down. And I said, "Hey, can you give me are you going back to the main building? Can you give me a ride? It's starting to rain." And he was like, "Yeah, get in." So I got in the car, and he made a joke about, what are you still doing here? Isn't it time for you to like quit again and go get a job someplace else? Because I'd come to Disney, I'd quit, I'd come back to Disney, and I was, the world, the animation world was a big red apple, and I just couldn't get a big enough bite. So I was always jumping around to something I thought was a little more interesting. And I said, no, no, I think I'm going to stick around a little while this time. He was like, oh. Then we're back at the main building, and I said thanks, and I got out of the car. Well, that conversation, it just sort of gave me the courage and the opening to just schedule a meeting with him and just say, no, I do want to stay. I'm going to work on my drawing, work on my animation, and eventually I'd like to direct projects. And he did literally say, how are you going to do that? I said, well, I figure I will just kind of bug you every 5 or 6 weeks and just maybe schedule a little 15-minute meeting and just tell you what I think about stuff. And eventually, after I animate on a project or maybe supervise a character or have a little crew working under me on a character, they'll say, wow, we have this little project. This might be a good thing for Chris to direct. And that's really exactly what happened. I animated on a few movies, and then a small project came up to direct for Paris Disneyland, and I directed two small projects there, and they went well. And then a project came up to supervise CGI on the first Hocus Pocus movie of the animated cat. They were having a little bit of trouble with their CGI cat, and they came to feature animation, and Peter Schneider told them to, talk to Chris Bailey, because I was one of the few 2D animators that had some experience in CGI. And then, that got me my
So when
first
you're
live
okay,
action
so you're
experience.
animating as your regular job, and then you're brought away to direct on these projects. Did you have to sign new contracts and everything, or you're just kind of like keeping the same role and then just
No, no,
spending your
no. The Walt Disney Imagineering projects, those were part of Walt Disney, and there was a lot of synergy within the company, that if they had a project that was heavy on character animation to direct, that however that relationship worked with features, they would say, "Oh, is there someone that you think would be ideal with this?" I don't know who reaches out to who first. I have no
yeah.
idea. But I just my first few projects were directing were for Walt Disney Imagineering.
Okay, so you still kind of have the same role, and then you go back to your role afterwards. It's not
That's
like
right. That's right. You
so. Tell
sort
me
of
about your first directing experience. You'd never directed something before. It's a small project. You're not animating every day anymore. Like, how did what did you feel on day one of directing this project?
um, how do I do this?
Yeah, right.
I guess the these it was luckily it was a relatively simple introduction to directing. It was these little short animated cycles for a post show for the It's a Small World ride at Paris Disneyland.
Yeah.
So you walk out of the ride, and there was a little 3D set, and each building represented an icon from a different country. So there'd be Big Ben or the Taj Mahal, or something like that. And when you'd look inside one of the windows, there'd be a little dollhouse set, and then animation would be projected in using the Pepper's Ghost effect, which is like the Haunted Mansion. There's a little TV screen at the top and a piece of glass at a 45-degree angle. And France Telecom foot the bill for this ride. So it was someone in a country getting a message from a friend in another country using one of the wonders of France Telecom, and then they would sing a musical message that would sink in the da 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 da, like a bullfighter's waiting, like, oh my God, I'm late for the bullfight. And then all of a sudden his cell phone goes off, or he picks up his cell phone and he calls and he wakes the bull up saying, where are you? And he's like, oh my God, I overslept. And then the little balloon disappears and the bull runs into the shot, and then they, hold hands and say la 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 la. So it was all these little like 8-panel, like 15 8-panel cycles, little vignettes that would just cycle over and over again. So there were two great things about that. One is I learned exactly how much information can you tell in a panel or in a 15-second cycle, which is wonderful training. And the second thing is, because it was a Walt Disney project and France Telecom and feature animation, and everybody always wanted to see it and to see where it was. So this whole thing of having to stand up in front of people and pitch boards with a pointer, is, if you imagine giving your first, speech in class in school, it's terrifying, and like your heart's beating like it's going to pop out of its chest. But the best part of it was I had to pitch so many times, so often, I just became exhausted. And it just became something that was like, falling out of bed. Just like, oh yeah, hi, and you just pitch it again, and pitching so much so often, I really got into the rhythm of pitching it. I could hone the jokes a little bit. It was, in a way, I guess it's kind of like doing stand up.
Nice.
So anyway, so that was it. It was a very simple project. It was really cute, and everybody really liked it. But it was very, very simple and a perfect first project.
Yeah, it still sounds like you learned a lot that, you probably took with you to other projects. So how did you, so it sounds like, you got small projects and then bigger and bigger projects, and now you're directing feature films. What is the biggest, why does somebody call up Chris Bailey to say, hey, I want to, like, for instance, the Great Wolf Pack, which for Great Wolf Lodge, why did they call up you and say, you're the guy, like, we know about?
Well, um, like, I've known Brendan at Six Point Harness for years. My agent actually got us acquainted, gosh, probably like 10 years ago. And even though I was like the visual effects guy, I think I was like the Alvin and the Chipmunks guy or the X-Men 2 guy with the Disney background at the time we met. And they don't do that. They haven't done a lot of that kind of work. But we liked each other, and we're like, wow, we got to find something to do together. And I'd say, yeah, you do a lot of stuff that's like really fast, and I've done the stuff that's like really slow and the expensive of the expensive, and I'd love to do something. I've done a little bit of TV, and I like doing stuff that can move a little faster. Um, and whenever we'd see each other at Comic-Con or something, we'd always say hi. And so eventually, I think when the Great Wolf people were bidding out this project and going out to animation houses, I'm just grateful Brandon thought of me, saying, "Oh my God, this is a really, cute kind of 3D character animation kind of thing that Chris excels at. Maybe he'd be interested in directing that project for us." So he just asked me to come in and help give some advice on the pitch and lend my name to it should they win the award.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I think the Great Wolf people, they responded to the other work I've done in the past, and I was acquainted with the live action, not live action, but the film producer Julia Pistor, who I'd been acquainted with before, again through my agent, and I liked, but we'd never worked together. So it was kind of a win-win. We tried to work together a couple times. So it was like, wow, Julie and I want to work together, and they like my old work, and Brandon and I want to work together. It just all kind of, dovetailed
Wow.
together.
So it sounds like, a combination of your resume and also knowing kind of just people who want to work with you.
I think so.
Is
And
that
you
how a
really
lot of your
make it
directing
hard.
projects come about?
I'm sorry?
Is that how a lot of your directing projects come about?
I think so. I'm trying to think. Sometimes it comes about through, um, just meeting someone who had to bow out of a project and they
Hmm.
recommend you. I started like a 10-year CGI animation direction gig at Fox because a friend of mine who was originally going to direct the animation on Garfield uh, begged out of it. And he said, "Look, I can give them your name if you want." I was like, "Sure." And so I did Garfield 1 and Garfield 2 and the visual effects, the animatic sequence on the end of Aragon, and the Alvin and the Chipmunk movies, and
Tons
I don't
of
know,
other
all kinds of
stuff.
stuff over there.
I'm curious, what was the advice that you gave on this, the Great Wolf Lodge pitch with 6-point harness?
I'm trying to think. It was more about like looking at artwork because the Great Wolf people had put together a wonderful array of artwork of films that they liked.
Hmm.
And it wasn't a cohesive art direction look. It was just, gosh, we love the look of Klaus, and look, and oh, there's this scene from, I don't know, just whatever, Little Mermaid. We love this look too, and it was really a matter of talking with some of the artists, at Six Point, and it's like, well, what should we put in this portfolio to say here? If we looked at your core material, read your script, this is what we think we could do. Not that we're actually doing final character designs or final art direction or anything, but we're just saying, here's a take. We're inspired to go this direction. So I think it was with character design, it was really about getting some of that classic sort of 3D character animation into it.
Nice.
Background design, it was really keying off some of the inspiration they'd given us, which was very theatrical and very shape oriented. So I don't know if they would articulate it that way, but I was like, wow, they love theatrical lighting. Whether they like it or not, whether they know it or not, they love theatrical lighting, and they do like a stronger sense of graphic design to the shapes. so that sort of gave us our direction.
Interesting. I guess so. Understanding kind of the behind what they're looking for and giving it back to them. I'm curious about this project because most of the people I talk to that work on features, the features are stories that are made up by the studio, I guess, in a sense, versus this project is a company asking to include their branded characters in a feature film. What are some of the interesting kind of aspects and challenges of making a feature film revolving around a company's branding? That's pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, well, that this was I have to give all the credit to Kent Redeker for that. He's the producer, writer. He joined the project before me, and what there wasn't a universe to these characters. If you did go to the Great Wolf Lodge, you would see drawings, cartoon drawings of a wolf or a squirrel or these characters, but they don't really look like our characters, and they didn't have a world or a universe like the Disney universe where Mickey, Donald, and Goofy live together, or the ducks live in Duckburg, and they're and really what they were looking for, the Great Wolf people, is to make this a world and give these characters a character and a relationship. And so Kent is the one that really sort of lived and breathed these characters and came up with this unique take, which I think is pretty genius, because you have our realistic world of the Great Wolf Lodge in our animated universe, and it's not a hotel or it's not a destination. It's called the Great Wolf Lodge, but it's where all the animal characters hang out. And these animal characters, they have families, and it's just the meeting place. Then there's a place called the Great Sunny Spot that all the kids like to hang out at. Now, growing up in Oregon, all these when I think of rolling hills of trees and being out in the forest, I go, oh, it's overcast. So I'm thinking, oh, Great Sunny Spot, maybe that's over the cloud layer. And the only reason kids go there, not adults, is because they have energy and they have all day to devote to one particular activity. So kids hang out at the Great Sunny Spot, and then what happens is one of our characters slides off into the next adjacent valley, and that's our Fantasy Valley, where there's a Great Wolf Geyser and there are the fantastic creatures that our characters interact with live. So in a way, it's like there's the fantasy world, and then there's the realistic world, and they're separated by a giant, mountain range, I guess.
Okay, I'm curious. Did you have to get approval from like the corporate team on kind of the aspects of the messaging you're giving and like specific things you have to say or include or things like that? I'm just wondering, because normally you're kind of working with the producers and whatnot on figuring that stuff out versus like a brand, which I think is interesting.
Well, they actually were the Great Wolf people. They weren't just the approval people that we would pitch to every month or 2 months or something like that. They were our partners on it. So they were, they lived with the script. They were happy with the script, and so really, I shared dailies with them. We met once a week, weeklies, I guess. Dailies in live action, weeklies in animation, and I, since I've worked with so many different directors and studios doing visual effects, where there's a lot of voices, I know sort of how far I can go before it's gone too far, or where it causes a rift if they, don't like it. But I never want to give something that's not far enough along that they can't comment on. So really, they were just like partners. Here, like for example, I'll pitch character designs, and I'll usually sort of push things, whether I'm doing them or a member of my team, go a little more cartoony, a little more realistic, a little more, animal, a little more human with animal heads kind of thing, just to kind of see where they're going. And then when they respond to those initial roughs, then we can push a little further that direction. Now, once we know who those characters are, or I say, look, okay, based on the script, I think this character comes across to me as about this old. Would you say they're that old? How old do you see them? Or, and they would give me their feedback. And then also I would do the walk cycles and run cycles of the characters, which I think are dependent on their anatomy and their character. And then and I would ask them, I said, "What do you think? I did this run cycle on Wiley, and I chose this because of these reasons." And usually, because we were so tight from the beginning of the project, um, usually I was right on. They were like, "Wow, that's great. Yeah, do more of that." Or sometimes they'd say, "Oh, could we do this too?" So I was sort of inspiring, them to come up with ideas to add on
Nice.
to the
Were you doing the run cycles yourself? Like you were drawing them yourself?
some things I would did quite a bit of drawing myself. I mean,
Oh,
I
wow.
sometimes I would do initial character designs and say I'm thinking something kind of like this, and I would hand it off to a character designer. With the runs and walks, I actually did do those, um, and sometimes I for the some fantastic characters like we have these Borple beasts, so these big sort of furry buffalo type things that can run on all fours and walk on their hind legs. And I think I just gave a drawing for those, and then our animation studio did some runs, and then I went over those runs, just to
Nice.
kind of push them a little bit.
Wow.
But
I
the
love
runs of
how
our gang, yeah, I did those myself.
I love how involved you are in actually like, doing the kind of the work yourself and directing and stuff. Were you also overseeing like the voice actors and everything else like that too?
Yeah, yeah. I worked with gosh, I'm blanking on Renee's last name now. He'll kill me. But yeah, he was a terrific. He was a voice director and a partner with me on that, and he helped cast our show. So he was wonderful in that. He was casting agent and voice director, and we would sort of tag team a lot of the voice directing.
Nice. Can you give me some, because not only are you working with, animators and, people that are working on backgrounds and lighting and stuff, and also voice actors, can you give me some tips on dealing with voice actors? Because they're not kind of in the animation, you know, drawing talent. They're in a totally different talent. And your experience is in animation. So how does that translate when you're communicating and working with them?
There's a funny anecdote that comes out when I was at Cal Arts. At the end of the school year, everyone's parents come out and everyone's like anxious to show their parents, look, that's how you make an animated cartoon. You storyboard it, and then you record the actor, and then you draw it. And I remember a friend of mine, Kelly Asbury's mom, said, "Okay, I understand everything, but there's only one thing I don't understand. How do you make them talk?" So yeah, so voice acting and also what's the difference between voice directing animators and directing actors? And it's really for an animated film, you're directing it twice. You're directing a performance with the live action actor, the voice actor, and you're directing that same performance again with the animator and the board artist who's actually drawing it. But yeah, it was. But I didn't go to school for it. I went to school to be a cartoonist guy. So when I first started directing and had to deal with an actor, the advice they gave is, oh, well, go home, read the script, make your notes, and get your alts down there. And I'm like, notes? Well, what kind of note do you give? You know, I had no idea, but I'm like, okay,
Right,
okay,
like
I'll do
sound
that.
happy in this one and sound
Well,
like
yeah, well, so I would always prepare, and the actors would always come in with this great spirit of cooperation, but I could tell sometimes I wasn't giving the actor what they needed or not. And so uh, I was probably a couple years into my directing career when I had the opportunity to have dinner uh, with some friends who asked if I would join them for a dinner with an old Hollywood actor who turned out to be Jonathan Harris, who I knew from the old Lost in Space show when I was a little boy, and he did the voice of the praying mantis in Bug's Life. So we're at dinner and we're having wine, and I just confessed to him that you know I'm an animator guy and I've directed actors, but I really don't know what I'm doing. What does an actor need? And he gave me some wonderful advice. He said, really, all I need to know is what does my character want, and how does he feel about those around them. And then after that, it can be faster. You got to speak, especially for animation, be louder because you're in an airplane and you got to yell over the engine, or be quieter because you don't want anyone else to hear.
so like give me an example. So like you have two characters in an airplane and they're just talking to each other about the meal in front of them. What like, what would your directorial advice be to the voice actors voicing these two characters that are just, the shot is them just sitting and talking about a meal? Like, how do you tell them what do they want, and how do they feel about the people around
Well,
them, for instance?
in generic sense, just to understand the concept, if you had two people, discussing dinner at candlelight dinner, and they could be talking about, their kids or a move they're going to do or something like that, and you tell one of the actors that you want to kiss the other person, they're going to give you a certain performance, even though they're talking about those mundane stuff.
Yeah.
There's going to be this electricity and an attraction there. And then if you tell that same actor and you just want to wring their neck or you want to stab them to death, it's still going to be calm dialogue in a quiet restaurant over candlelit dinner, but there's just going to be this acerbic performance in there.
That makes a lot of sense.
In broad terms, I think that's the way I always approach it. What does the character want? And really then what they're speaking about is immaterial, because their job as the actor is to communicate that internal want. So there was a scene in Kim Possible that I remember, as you brought up the question, that Kim was she was in an airplane. And the whole thing about Kim Possible, the joke is that because Kim's only 15 and she can't drive yet, she has to hitch a ride all around the world to solve whatever problem she's got or she's faced with. And because she's helped so many people in the world, she can call in a favor to anybody. And so anyway, there was one particular episode, she's in a biplane and she's having a conversation with the pilot. And I remember asking Christy, now we're just in a booth, right? So she's in a booth in front of a microphone. And I said, I really need you to project in this one because the airplane's going to be really loud. And she came back and she was yelling the line out. And I said, okay, even louder. And she went even louder. And I still wanted it even bigger. And I was thinking, well, because I could tell she looked at me like, I don't know what you mean. I've gotten as loud as I can go. It's going to be ridiculous at that point. So I said, I was in the booth now, or I was in the control room outside the booth. And I said, okay, I'm going to turn off the microphone. And I want you to yell your line so loud that I can hear you through the glass without the microphone connected. And then she did it, and it was brilliant. So
you had secretly had the microphone on that entire time too.
Oh no, I'm sorry. No, I. Yeah,
the speaker, you mean?
Be like, why did you do that? We didn't need to hear her scream. But so there are things like that. You can do tools. To.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because
someone how extreme you want it.
I've made a couple of live action short films in my day, and my advice to the actors has been horrible. They're like, "What do you mean? Do it angrier," and like it doesn't make sense to them. That makes so much sense.
Well,
how does this
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, how does this differ from advice you would give an animator when you're directing an animation? Like that candlelit dinner scene, would you also say, animate these two characters talking, but this character wants to kill the other character? Like, does that advice translate there as well?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And also, what you just said is be angry. It's like, well, what does that mean?
Right.
I can communicate anger and never raise my voice just by going wide-eyed, and I can think of all the times I've been really angry when I've shouted, and when I've been really angry and I've like kept my cool, but people knew I was still angry. So I think what you do, you give someone physical something. You try to give an actor something physical. So instead of saying, "Oh, you're angry," just say, "You just want to wring their neck, but you can't."
Right. Interesting.
Or you want them to know that you're going to kill them at your first opportunity, or you want to mock them, or what? If you put the word "want" first, I think that action will just kind of come to you.
And the performance changes 100% after you give that advice.
Yeah, and I found whenever I've kind of failed, and I can tell I'm frustrating actors, if I stop and rewind and then just think about, well, what do I know what the character wants? Maybe I don't really know what they want, and I'm not communicating that clearly. Yeah,
I think it's interesting that you became a better voice actor director just from a random dinner with it, and asking a seasoned actor what they want. So tell me about a time when, because you've also directed tons of animation and supervised animation, etc. Tell me about something that's similar where you kind of learned how to direct animators better. It sounds like, you've been directed for quite a long time, so you must have had started off with more skill. But is there, a story or something where you really learned how to, ease that process of directing animators and getting the result that's the overall look of the film is going for? In that
No,
sense?
absolutely. The one thing comes to mind when I was working on the movie Mighty Joe Young, that it was a pretty unique situation where uh, there was a man dressed in a gorilla suit. There were some mechanical giant gorillas, and then there were several scenes. I think not a lot by today's standards, but there were probably 30 or 40 scenes of a CG gorilla, CG Joe, and so I was working with a team of animators. And when you're just working for yourself and you're given a scene, here's a gorilla, animate a gorilla. You animate the gorilla and you just kind of, I would just go back to my desk and like, oh, okay, gorilla walks like this, and I just bang on it until it looks right. I draw it, redraw it, draw it again, turn the drawings upside down, backwards, and but when you direct other people, you have to give more concrete advice. So there was an animator who was doing a scene where Joe was walking along and the Ferris wheel explodes, and Joe, it shocked him and he jumped back. His first take was he animated the gorilla doing a cartoon take where there was a loud noise and he went bang, he kind of jumped up and backed up. And it was well animated. And I showed it to the man in the suit, and he said, he says, this is good, but animals, when they're afraid, they 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 antic, in animation terms. They cower, and it's not because they're afraid, but they scrunch down so that they can either run away or attack.
Hmm.
So this whole thing of jumping up in the air and going and doing a scramble, even on a photoreal thing, is just not realistic.
So the man in the suit himself, he was kind of the expert on how gorillas.
Oh yeah, I would. This is a wonderful thing because Rick Baker worked. He created the suit, and he worked with this actor inside the suit to get the performance. And I would actually meet with John, the actor, gosh, once a week, every 2 weeks. I would just show him dailies and go, "What do you think?"
Oh,
Because
that's
our
awesome.
goal in that film was not to create a photoreal gorilla. Our job was to create a photoreal version of him wearing the suit. So we were matched. I wanted our gorilla, our Joe, to be his Joe. So I wanted him to, as an actor, direct me and tell me where I did something with Joe that was outside of what he would do.
Yeah. So okay, that makes a lot of sense. So then, you showed it to him and he said, the gorilla's gonna, when he's scared, he's gonna, bunch up. So then you went back to the animator.
Yeah, and said, okay, bunch him up, and finish your shot. And he went, okay, great. And he was good. But then here's another. This is just where it was sort of a unique experience for me because I was relatively new and supervising other animators at that point. The animator had the four-legged walk of Joe, and a four-legged walk is tough. I mean,
And
you can do a
especially
generic
mimicking a
four-legged
man
walk,
in a
but
gorilla suit, I can
yeah,
imagine.
so exactly. We're not just, okay, you
Don't
do a
put me on
dog,
that
that's
shot.
one thing, right? Okay, and then it's like, okay, now do a gorilla. Okay, that's its own thing. Okay, now don't just do a gorilla, but mime this man pretending to be a gorilla, and it wasn't the best walk, and you could tell he was struggling with it, and he asked me for some advice, and I said, oh, I sat down and gave him the advice on the pattern of a four-legged walk, and we looked at some of the footage, and I pointed some things out, and then I walked away thinking, wow, I'm glad I don't have to animate that shot because man, that's hard. Well, he called me back a few hours later, and he said that I was looking at the live action footage of John in the suit, and I'm not seeing those things that you told me about for a four-legged walk, and it forced me to actually sit down and uh, articulate why it had to move that way, even if he couldn't see it in the footage of John wearing this black gorilla suit. Why the hips had to move the way they did,
Hmm.
this way, that way, and rotate, so he didn't fall over when he walked. And really, that was an education for me too, because like I said, up until that point as an animator, I would just kind of, draw rhythms and shapes and poses I liked, and I would just kind of keep working it until I liked it. But now I had to really approach it more from the outside in and say, look, here are the mechanics of a four-legged walk, and this is why it has to work the way it does. And, to his credit, that shot was brilliant when he finished with it. It was better than something I could have animated myself. And so it was two things. It was not only a great learning experience, but I just felt this tremendous sense of accomplishment afterward that I had directed someone to animate a shot better than I could
Oh,
direct
wow.
myself, when he was clearly going into that shot,
That's,
my junior.
yeah, that's incredible. Also, I think it's super interesting that uh, I guess in your animation career, you'd never done something like that before that was maybe so technically needed because you're trying to mimic live action gorilla man suit, but
Yeah,
dialing it
right.
back to the technical, like, bare bones of what's going on really changed everything.
Also, how jobs happen, the connections that happen. I'd worked with the producer of Mighty Joe Young previously on the movie Hocus Pocus.
Yeah.
So when they were having trouble with their gorilla, he reached out to me just to say, "Would you look at our footage and just tell me what you think is wrong with it?" And the original reproach was that, oh, John, this actor who's done he's done on-screen acting and he's been in creature suits, and that he knows how a gorilla moves, so he's a man pretending to be a gorilla. They thought, well, since he's pretending to be a gorilla and he knows gorillas, we'll take our CG gorilla over here and we'll animate a real gorilla and make it photoreal, and somehow these things will kind of meet together. And it was just the wrong approach because you really then have
Yeah, that makes
a
sense.
bunch of animators animating their own version of what they thought a real gorilla was.
Yeah.
And some were more cartoony, some less, but none of them were John's performance, in the suit. So when I came on, I said, well, we need to shift gears and everybody needs to like look at John in the suit, and we need to identify what is it about it that makes him unique, and we need to do that in our animation. And
Yeah,
once
that
we
makes a
started
lot of
doing that,
sense.
it worked really well.
I'm just wondering, thinking about your career as an animator, what was something that really, pulled you through and made you improve and kind of get ahead in that career? Like, was it, just a mentality of always learning, or hyper focusing on one thing and kind of becoming an expert at that? Like, what would you say your success as an animator was all those years?
Well, there was, when I first started, I struggled with drawing, you know, maybe more than some, not as much as others. But I was always trying to draw, looking what other animators were doing, and think, wow, that's a really neat take on Dirk the Daring or Sebastian the Crab or whatever. But I always felt like I was kind of drawing from things that I saw the other animators drawing around me, and I knew how to squash and stretch and into antic and things like that, and understood, was trying to understand weight and all that as best I could. So um, but then there was a short project that I directed on my own uh, while I was at Disney after hours. It was a video for Paul Abdul, the MC Scat Cat video. And I animated a fair chunk of those shots myself, and I had a video in my garage, and I asked all my animation buddies to animate a shot. But I think that was the first one when I just started, because there was no model sheet or anybody else to crib from. I just was like, well, I just want to let me just make a good drawing. I
Hmm.
don't know, and stopped worrying about model and go, oh, is this a funny squash drawing on the character's face, or why can't I make the hand this big, dragging it across the screen, and and I think that was a big leap where I stopped trying to slave to the model sheet or squashing and stretching the model sheet, and I just started making drawings,
Interesting.
uh, and
So,
animating
so
those
you
drawings.
found a jump in your skill set from going from kind of the formula approach to throwing that away, experimenting, and then coming back and implementing kind of both sides to make just a
That's
good
right.
overall
Instead of like
drawing.
you look at like Sebastian the Crab, oh, that's how he is, and you're drawing little things, and you just go, here's his general shape. Let me just do a funny drawing of Sebastian, And then, you can always go back and look and go, oh, I made the head too big or the body a
Yeah.
little too big or whatever and tweak it. But I think that leap of going toward drawing and trying to make sure that my drawings were on model as well as animating well, to where it's
Yeah.
like, let me just say I understand that drawing. Let me just do a funny drawing or
That makes a
a
lot
good
of
drawing.
sense.
But yet I guess it's a confidence leap too, where I don't need to copy what other people have done at that point. I can try my own.
Yeah.
I can do my own squash or my own run on the character.
I love it. What would you say, kind of the same question, but as your directorial career has been your success?
Um, Gosh, I just kind of looked at character, like getting back to the Great Wolf for a second. The reason that I wanted to animate the walks and the runs was we all walk and run a little bit differently, um, and they're very identifiable. There was a hallway at Disney Feature that in the afternoon, if you're walking one way, everybody was a silhouette, and if you're walking the other way, you could see what everybody was frontlit, and it was amazing how you could tell who was walking toward you in silhouette, um, just by virtue of their walk and their timing, or it was a barometer of how well you knew them. If you didn't, someone said, "Hey, Chris," and I'm like, "Who's that?" It's like, well, I guess I don't know them that well. But more people, more often than not, you could tell exactly who it was just by the timing and shape of their walk. So for Great Wolf, I was thinking, okay, great, we got this not aggressive, but he's this sort of fearless wolf with Wily Wolf. So his run's got to be aggressive, and he's a wolf. So I made him low to the ground, and his nose is right out front, and it's a very confident run, and it's boom, boom, boom. This. Then there's Violet Wolf, and she's equally confident, but I wanted to contrast her with Wiley, and I was trying to think, well, what communicates that? And my stepdaughter is a distance runner, and she just has this beautiful gait when she runs, and I've loved watching this distance runners, and it was elegant and a great contrast to Wiley. So I'm like, I'm gonna make her run like that. And then you have Brinley the bear. He's 6 years old, so he's arguably, say everyone in our group is between 11 and 13, 11, 12. Brinley's the baby at 6. So his run, I figure they're either going to be running from something where he's going to be scared out of his mind, or he's going to be running towards something and super happy. So I gave him a really big bouncy run. So if we change his face where he's going, ah, it's going to look like he's trying to get the heck out of there. But if he had a big smile on his face, that run would still work because the bounce would then communicate a fun kind of energy. Then Sammy, she's got a different body than the raccoon, Oliver. So I just sort of played with their anatomy. So she's got a big bushy tail, so I wanted to give her sort of a little bouncy walk. So it would allow her tail to really flow up and down. And so anyway, I just approached the characters like that. I don't know if that. I think I diverged a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's all right. No, what I'm getting from this is, part of your success of directing is really understanding, the world and the characters and really feeling out who they are. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I guess it's the advice I was given to direct actors. And once I know who the character wants and how they feel about their situation, then it helps me animate them.
Hmm.
Also, I have to say there's one other thing with directing board artists, because I kind of skipped over. I boarded a little bit, but I largely went from being a character animator to a director. And gosh, when I think about boarding, it's you get a blank piece of paper and it's like, oh, I could do anything. But working in live action really helped me sort of hone my film grammar skills and understand, well, where do you put the camera? Why do you put the camera low? Why do you put the camera up high? What does it mean to do that? Or, and also in live action, there's a physical limitation to where you put the camera. So I found after I did those live action films, working with experienced directors of photography and live action directors, I was able to sort of direct animated storyboards a little bit.
Nice. So also having like a well-rounded experience, it definitely helps too. Yeah. I'm wondering, we've chatted about where you came from, how you worked through your career, like some projects you've worked on. What's next for you?
Well, I'm still working on the Great Wolf Lodge. I have two more shows to mix. I'm still approving a handful of shots, and hopefully more Great Wolf Lodge. I mean, I love working, at Six Point with Brendan and Vera and Susan and my crew. Gosh, it's been fantastic. So, Brendan and I both expressed a desire to continue it in some
Nice.
way, and we're hoping Great Wolf Lodge will like our work so much that they pull the trigger and make more. But we're still kind of waiting on that. But it's really been a wonderful, wonderful partnership. But right now, I'm just finishing up Great Wolf Lodge, and working. And now because it's tapering off a little bit, I've been working a little more on a personal project. So that's always fun.
Ooh, personal projects. That's exciting. I'm wondering,
Yeah,
as we're kind of
yeah.
wrapping up our chat, is there anything that you haven't shared that you think would be interesting? Just because you've had such a I don't want to say a long career,
I know, a long
and
career. So
worked
now
on
that you
so
get into
many
the end of
different
your
cool
career,
things over the years. Is there anything that you wanted to share with
you
the
can see the
audience?
bottom of the hill at the end of your career. Um, well, yeah, I would love. I do have a website that has my work on it. I don't have a huge like Instagram presence, so I'm not always posting new work, but you can kind of see a little bit of what I've done on my website. And also, there's a major damage page on my website. It's a personal project that, gosh, I created a couple decades ago as a comic book and a little CG short film. And it's kind of grown with me. I kind of always keep drawing it. I always keep writing it. I've never really done anything with it. It's almost become a movie once or twice. But I do have a Facebook page devoted to major damage as well. That occasionally, as I finish animating shots in Harmony, I post those, and you can look at least one of the animatics for the shorts that I boarded myself
Nice,
on the on my website page.
nice.
So I guess people can look there, and I'm easy to find. I love looking at people's work. Whether if you're a student or even a high school fan or a high
Well,
school
be
student.
careful what you wish for, and you might get bombarded.
What's that?
You be careful what you wish for. You may get bombarded. I don't know.
Well, yeah, that can happen too. But you know what? You figure if people kind of overstep, you kind of give a little less advice every time. Because sometimes people
Yeah,
say,
right.
"Help me to become good," and you're like,
You're like,
you know.
listen, you
But
contact me
occasionally,
every
like
week for the last
a good
year. Like, just publish
well,
your
a good friend
project
of mine.
already.
I got to tell you this success story because
Yeah,
a good friend of mine, Shannon Tyndall, and he created Kubo and the Two Strings, and it just a bunch of other wonderful projects. I was at Disney Feature, and he sent me an email of just some things that he was doing in high school,
wow.
and said, "What do you think? Is this good? I made a CG Cogsworth," and he showed me drawings. He was trying to get into Cal Arts, and I loved responding to his work. He was clearly talented, and
So he just reached out
was
on a whim. He
respectful of
found
my
your contact
time, and
information somehow and was like, I'm gonna send my high school drawings to this bigwig Disney guy.
he picked a moderate wig. I was
Um,
like sort of
to this
Andreas
moderate
Davidson. He
wig
was the
Disney.
big
He
wig.
probably
I was
reached
the
out to
moderate
everybody
wig.
at Disney, and you were the one who just responded.
Right, right.
No, I think that's a really great story. A lot of people, it's so funny when I publish an episode, people will contact me and say, "Oh, I really wish I could talk to that person," and I just respond, "Go ask that person." Like, there's nothing stopping you from reaching out to that person. So I think that's great
Yeah,
that.
right. It's like, hey, how do I get a job at Disney? Well, they have this website, and you can actually log on and apply and write a
Right.
write a nice cover letter. Not too long.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, hilarious.
send a link
Well,
to your work.
yeah. Well, Chris, it's been such a pleasure to hear your whole journey, and you've given me some really great tips on next time I have to deal with voice actors or directing. I've written down your tips on my
Yes, and go to
notepad
the Great
here.
Wolf Lodge. Take a vacation to Great Wolf Lodge. What? It's the only place you can. Well, I guess they have a YouTube page. You can see some of the movies, but some of them you can only see in the
Well, I've
hotels.
watched the trailer and exactly what you said. It's a combination of great lighting, the kind of Klaus realism style, and some really fun characters. So yeah, I'm
Yeah,
excited
big
to
big
check that
shout
out.
out to Kelsey Swan for our background design. She just
And
interpreted all my direction and all these crazy, crazy pieces of inspiration, and just out the other side came our show. So
Nice. Well, thanks again for coming on.
All right, thank you.
It's
This is
it's
awesome.
my pleasure. Great. And if you're listening and Chris kind of shared, but if you want to check out his stuff or maybe reach out to him, you can do so by checking out his website, which is damagedfilms.com, or his Facebook page, which is facebook.com/maj.damage. And I'll include both those links in the description of this chat. And that's all for now. Thank you so much for listening. Okay, bye.
The music for this podcast was composed by Will Farmer and the graphics by Daniel Abensauer. I encourage you to look them up if you enjoyed their work.